Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you don't know me, my name is Sosa, and yes, I'm looking crazy per usual, but today I have a video for you and it's a big tutorial kind of taking you through the foundational steps that I went through for setting up a React app to work with AWS Amplify, which was the foundational pieces for me setting up my web app called Frostbite that I talked about in my previous video, and you can check that out. I'll also have it linked down below. In this video, I'm kind of just going to be taking you through building out a really bare bones React app using AWS Amplify. And AWS Amplify just really allows you to get up and running really quickly. So this video, I don't really know how long it is, but literally I'm doing all of this in real time and kind of connecting all of this stuff in real time. And so it doesn't take that long to get up and running. You don't have to kind of build out your own development server or anything like that. You can use everything that AWS has in the cloud. And so I'll be going over AWS Amplify, Cognito, which is authentication and allowing you to create users on the app, and DynamoDB/GraphQL, which DynamoDB is AWS's NoSQL database, and that's how you'll be storing things in the cloud and creating and updating and deleting those things. GraphQL, which is how you'll be able to interact with the database. So that's a lot of information, but that's kind of just, the tech stack that is in this video. I'll also link all the resources that I use to understand each of those stacks down below. This is just a video to help you kind of get started. And if you run into any errors, if you find anything that doesn't work, please feel free to leave comments down below. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Let's jump into it. Hi everybody. So as promised in my last video, I wanted to kind of take you through the tutorial that I used to set up the foundational pieces of my web app that I'm currently building called Frostbite. If you didn't see that, check out the last video. I have it linked below. And I'll also have this article linked below, and I'm kind of just going to follow along with it and kind of walk through it with you, and we can do it together, and I'll probably put my own spin on a couple of things. But yeah, let's just jump into it. It's going to look something like this, right? So we have our note app, and then we have being able to add notes to a database, and being able to edit a note, delete a note, things like this. We're going to be using AWS as the backend, and so that we don't have to set up our own servers or anything like that. What we're going to do is install the essential tools that we need. So pick a directory that you want to work in, and then we are going to do npm install and then the AWS CLI, which will allow us to connect AWS to our application. And so I already have a terminal up, and technically I already have it downloaded, but just to follow along, I can do it again, and that'll install the CLI that we need. So once you have AWS installed, you're also going to want to npm install and then the create React app, and this will create the initial structure that you need for your React app. And then after you run that command, we want to do create React app with whatever we want to call our application. So we'll go here and we'll do create React app, and then we're gonna call this YouTube notes, and then that'll create our React app, and we'll just wait for it to run. So after it's finished running, you can see that the create React app was created, and instead of using yarn, I usually use npm, which is how we originally downloaded or installed all the dependencies. And I'm going to link some resources down below for more background information on React, npm, and all these other foundational pieces that are important for you to understand before you jump into this. But anyway, so I use npm, and so to start our development server and to see what we have so far, or actually we have to change into the directory first. So if we go to what we called our app, which was YouTube notes, so now we are in YouTube notes, and if we do npm start, we should be able to see our app come up. And so there she is up and running, and now we can actually start to configure the backend with AWS Amplify. Since we now already have the AWS CLI installed, we can now go and configure it. So I'm going to open up another terminal, and I apparently already have one running, so I'm going to delete that one, open up another one. This is in Frostbite, so we're going to change it to our YouTube app. Okay, so now we're going to get that command to configure our Amplify CLI. Cool. So now it's going to open up the AWS console. And if you don't already have an account, then you'd have to create one. AWS has a free tier that you can be able to use. And so you won't be charged for anything. And then after this, I'll also show you how to kind of delete everything so that you don't leave this running if you don't want it to. So once you're logged in and signed in, you can go back and hit enter. And then you specify the region. I'm in US East 2. So to set up your app, you need to create a user that has admin privileges for your web app. And so this is called an IAM user in AWS. And so right here, we're just going to give it a name. And so I'm going to call it YouTube Notes Admin. And then that'll open up the console. And then yep, this is all good. We're not going to add anything further. So YouTube Notes Admin is going to have programmatic access with an access key, and then it'll have permissions boundary that are not set. And then I'm going to click create user, but I'm going to kind of jump to the next scene because, you know, it's going to have all of my secrets and access keys. And after you've created your user, you can click enter, and then you'll have to enter the access key and then the secret key. And then I'm going to just name this YouTube Notes. So now we have our AWS user set up. So now we're going to actually initialize Amplify. So AWS Amplify is the framework that allows you to connect your front end to certain AWS resources in the cloud. So that's a database and analytics and storage and things like that. And so we're going to we're going to initialize this in our current directory. So we'll just do Amplify init, and then we'll just call it YouTube Notes, the dev environment, and I'm using Visual Studios. This is a JavaScript app, and we're using React. Source will be the directory, and our directory path will be build. And then our build command is npm run script build, the start script, and then okay, so it's going to ask us if we want to use our AWS profile, and we're going to say yes. And we're going to use the one that we just created, so YouTube Notes. And now it's adding our backend environment and setting up our app. So AWS has completed initializing the project in the cloud. So we get our own deployment bucket and things like this. And now we can actually add some more Amplify or AWS related things to it. So one of the things that we can add is a backend server. And to do that, we can do Amplify Add API. And so this will allow us to create a backend API to store notes, create notes, delete notes, and update notes. And so obviously we can do whatever else we want with the backend, but for this project, we want to be able to store and create notes and do all these other things, but without having to create our own server and our own instance. And doing it in the cloud, and we do Amplify Add API, we're going to add GraphQL. And we're just going to give it the YouTube Notes name. And we're using Amazon Cognito user pool, which is where our YouTube admin user lives. And that's how we're going to be interacting with the app. And that's how the API will interact with the app. And so do we want advanced settings? We're going to click no. Do we have an annotated GraphQL schema? No. Do we want a guided schema? Let's do yes. And so, yes, we want to edit the schema. So this is the schema for it to do. And we're actually going to change that and make it into a note. So we're going to copy this, and I can kind of quickly go over what this means in AWS. So this is the GraphQL structure for interacting with data, and this is the schema for data in our database. So from beginning to end, our type is just a type note. Type is type can be whatever you want it to be. It's just an object. So model just tells AWS that we want this object to be a note. And then the auth is interesting because the auth will allow you to kind of restrict who can see what type of object and which objects. So right now we have a note, and a note only has privileges to the owner. So nobody else on the platform will be able to see a note created by another user. So now we can actually declare the different parts of the note. And so a note will have an ID so that we can be able to identify it, and the note will have a note, which is just a string. And so these exclamation marks next to it means that these inputs are required in order to create a note. And so we can save that, and I'll actually add this folder to the workspace so that we can see what's happening. So here, Amplify creates its own directory of configuration tools. And so for the backend, we can see that API here was added. And if we click on API, this is where our schema lives. And then we can also see that auth was added. So when you go to create your web app, you'll now be able to create users, which is pretty cool. So now we actually want to push all of the changes that we've made to the cloud. And we'll do this by doing Amplify push. And so this will fetch any updates that it finds. And so here we can see that the current environment is dev, and we have our resources that are being created. And so do we want to continue? We say yes. And do we want to generate code for a newly created API? We're going to say yes. And I'll show you what that does later on. We're going to do JavaScript, and we're just going to keep the default. Do we want to generate all possible operations? Yes. 2 maximum statement in depth. That's what we're going to do. And so that's going to update the resources in the cloud. It's going to take a second, so I'll stop this and come back when it's done. So while AWS is still working in the cloud to set up our database, I am going to go back and start installing, or just install, a framework that I would like to use. So we're going to install a CSS framework called Andesign, and it's just the framework that I use for most of my projects. It's pretty easy to set up, and the components are really nice and clean. And all we have to do is run npm install ant-d --save, and that should install the framework into our current directory. Here, okay, so we see that AWS was actually set up. And so if we go to YouTube Notes, we can see that we have a new folder under source. And so here, these are all of our backend actions that AWS actually created for us. Kind of just want to show you what was created. And so we created remember that we created our note object, right? With just the ID and then the note, and then the auth just being the owner of the said note, whoever created it. And so now AWS took this object and was able to create a bunch of mutations and queries with the object. And so let's just quickly run through them. And so here we can see create note, and this is just an auto-generated file, and whenever we update this schema, it'll change to reflect. And a mutation is just a way to interact with the database. A mutation is when you want to do something to an object that you have in the database. So that means creating, updating, or deleting. Query is when you just want to read or get something from the database. Like we did in the previous step, I installed Design as our CSS framework, so we don't have to create all those components on our own. In this section, I kind of forgot that I had navigated to app.js in order to edit this code, so make sure that you go to that file in your React app directory. It should just be on the top level. Make sure that you have this line in there to link to Andesign, and that was just on this page for the usage. And I will also link this down below so that you can be able to get Andesign if you want. Also, if you wanted to use another CSS package. You can literally use whatever you want. There's Bootstrap, there's InDesign, there's something called Bulma. There are a bunch of CSS frameworks that you can use, and you don't have to use InDesign just because I'm using it. I just am familiar with it because I've been using it on other projects that I've been building. Anyway, so let's get back to the actual app that we're creating. What we're going to do is actually delete all of this because we don't need it. And I actually have to go to the component section. So the component section is kind of where all of the different components of InDesign lives with the documentation. I just want to pick up their header and title component. So a lot of my day is just copy and pasting. I'm just going to import the title component, and now we'll call this YouTube Notes. And that should go back to our app. And title is not defined. Okay, so that's because I have a capital I, which I shouldn't have. Okay, so that should load. And now we have YouTube Notes, very plain. I'm gonna move on to the actual meat of the application, which is creating and adding notes and things like that. The person in this tutorial used Bootstrap, like I talked about before, but we're not gonna be doing that. What we're going to do though is take these Amplify configurations that he has up top. We're going to import them here at the top. And I'll just call this AWS import in the comment. And also guys, let me just say that I'm not the best when it comes to coding on the fly. I'm not amazing at it. I don't learn as I go, and with React, like I said in my last video, I've been learning as I go. So make sure that you do your own research in how React works and how JavaScript works if you've never used it, and things like that. And also how AWS works, because this is kind of just to set up the foundation for whatever you want to build, but you should also be doing your own research and kind of playing around with things to see how it works. Anyway, so this first line is just to import Amplify and then to import the API, which is GraphQL that we're going to be using. All of this connects to GraphQL in the database, and then GraphQL operation is the operation that we want to do. So if we want to do a mutation or a query, whatever the operation is, we're going to be using GraphQL, and we're getting all of this from the AWS Amplify library. This line with Authenticator, this is actually going to allow us to add users to our application. So with Authenticator, we'll only allow somebody onto our app if they're a user. If they're not a user, then with Authenticator, we'll then redirect them to a sign up page, or if they're not logged in, if they did sign up and they haven't logged in, then it'll redirect them to a login page. And it's kind of a quick and easy solution to adding authentication to your app. This has like very basic styling, but it kind of just sets up the foundational pieces of authentication that we need. And then this line will import configuration information that we need for AWS. And this is very specific to how AWS originally configured everything in the cloud, and all the information that was used to create your stuff in the cloud then gets stored automatically under this directory. If it's not under this directory that I have here, then you have to go and double check to make sure it's there. Oh wait, no, it's right here. Okay, we are initializing Amplify and just configuring it with the exports our local exports that we have, and that's all just to communicate with AWS. And we're also going to add a line to import all of our query and mutation commands. And to do that, we are going to import all of our stuff from where AWS kind of put our initial stuff. So remember how we went through all of our mutations and queries? We are now just going to be getting all of them, and we do that by doing import star, which denotes everything, and we're going to bring in everything as queries from GraphQL/queries, and we're going to do the same thing for mutations. So that means that all of our mutations will live in this variable, and then all of our queries will live in this variable. So now if I save, we'll see if that compiled, and it apparently did not. And let's see. Oh, because I had the import, I have to move this down here, because imports have to be at the top, and it can't resolve AWS Amplify in the source. AWS Amplify, where's that? Can't resolve. I might have not even installed it. So that's my bad. I'm gonna go back and install AWS Amplify. Give me a second. Install AWS Amplify or AWS Amplify React, which is foolish of me, but because I've done this so long ago, it's been a while, but at least you're able to kind of debug with me and see what's happening. So that error was because I didn't download AWS Amplify, and then I got another one while I was debugging that said something about AWS Amplify/React not being available. And so all I did was install both of those by using this command below. npm install AWS Amplify React save, and did the same thing for AWS Amplify, and then that should be good to go. Hopefully, we'll see. Okay, so now we have another error. Oh, this is because I did not import queries and mutations from the correct place. So I think it's just right, source GraphQL. Yeah, that should actually be right. Let's see. Finally, okay, so everything imported as it should. So now we can actually get into the fun part of creating, updating notes and things of that nature. Now we're gonna go back to the tutorial and go to where we were. So I don't want to kind of copy and paste. I'm only going to go kind of function by function, do it that way so that we can all kind of see how this works. So one of the first things that we're going to do is set up the state. So in React, the state is kind of where you're able to store variables and data. And for this application, these are the variables that we're going to need to set up in the state. So ID, notes, value, display add, and display update. And I'll tell you as we go on what all of those are for. But for right now, I'm just going to copy this. And actually, our app right now is a function. So I want to create it, or I want to make it a component instead. And so I think what I can do is just create a class component instead. And if you don't understand what I'm doing, please look up the documentation for React. And make sure to understand the foundational pieces of React before you jump into this, because doing it the opposite way will be really frustrating and you won't really understand it. Although for me, it helps if I do both. So read the documentation and then go into it. Actually, what I can do, the React documentation is also really good. So we're gonna get the component. And I think I just need this part, the render part. Yes, and so instead of having this here, we're going to take that and put it here. And so this will convert our component into, or our functional component into a class component. I think that's what it's called. Obviously, like if I'm saying anything wrong, if I'm not getting it right, please feel free to say so down in the comments below. Again, I am not a React expert in the slightest. I am just doing my best, and I kind of just want to take you guys along for the ride. If you want to build something that you've always been wanting to build and you just didn't know where to start, this is how I started. So kind of just want to take you through that. by no means am I the expert at all. So feel free to, tell me I'm wrong in the comments below. It'll hurt, but I'll be fine. So what we want to first do is, okay, there's so much to do. So what we want to first do is be able to create a new note. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an input. So we're going to get that component for input from Ant Design. Just going to get a basic one. We're going to put that here. I'm also going to add a button. It's going to be add note. And we also want to make sure that we're importing all of this from Ant Design. So button and input. And we're going to change the placeholder to add a new note. So all I'm doing is creating or adding the components to the screen that I would like to use to create a new note. So we just have our title like we had before, and then now we have our input and we have a button. So if I save that and I go back to my app, component is not defined because I forgot to import it. So I think I can do it. This should be how you get a component from React. Cool. So now we have our YouTube notes and we have the input that we created and we have add a new note. So what we want to do is, again, being able to create a new note. So now we have our input. And in order to, and the state. I'm all over the place right now, but that's kind of how my mind works. So again, we want to get these values from the state, and I'll go over all of these as we continue on. But we want ID, note, value, and display add update. We want to be able to capture whatever is in our input and save that as a note. So in order to do that, we need to have a handler, a function handler, that'll be able to take whatever input that we have in here and store it in this value variable that we have in our state. So this article has a handler that we can use, and it's called this.handle change. And so we're going to take this. And this is the definition to bind this function to the current context of the app. Of like React has this concept of this, which is like the context that you're currently in the app. And it's hard to explain, but again, look into the documentation to learn more about it. But basically, we want to be able to bind the context, the current context, to this function. And then this function, now we're going to take the function and we're going to paste it right above render. And so I can kind of explain what this does. So handle change, and we'll also add it to our input. So we're going to call, so whenever a user inputs data, we want to call the handle change. So the function that handles this is called onChange, and then we'll just assign this .handle change, which will call this function every time this input is changed, and I can show you how that works in real time. But anyway, what handle change does is takes an event, which is the things that are going on with input. It'll take that and it'll get the value from event and then store it into our value that is in state. And to update a value in state, you just call this.setState. And so we can save that and we can see if it works. See that it's loading, and I'm going to move this over. And in Mozilla, I can inspect element and kind of see what's happening on the back end. And I think all I have to do is go to app, And so right here, when I click on app, I can actually see my state that I currently have defined. And so so the thought is that if I add a new node, it should update the state, which it does. So you can see I'm putting add this or add this node. And we can see as I'm typing, the value in state is being changed. And so the handle change function is actually doing this. Every time a user types, we get this change happening. And so that's great. So every time we change or add a new node, we'll be able to capture that input. So now, next, we want to be able to add that node that we found to or add that node that someone creates to our database. And to do this, we are going to now take the submit button or the submit function. And the same thing, we want to be able to bind the context of this to the submit function. And then we're going to take the handle submit function and put it right below. And so I can also tell you what this does. And so handle submit also takes an event, and we're going to bind this to the button. And so for the button, when somebody clicks, or no, it should be on click, my bad. So when somebody clicks on this button, they'll then be taken to handle submit. And I think we have to bind this to it so that it properly binds the context. And so back to what this function actually does. So it takes an event, which is the click. And so when you click on it, prevent default and stop propagation will stop the app from sending multiple clicks or submitting this more than one time before the first click was able to be submitted. And then we have our node. And so for this node, we're just creating an object, and we want to define it as note, because remember, in our schema, we have our note, which is one of the inputs that is required to create a new note object. And so we have that. And then we don't include an ID because actually AWS will create a unique ID for the object automatically if you don't include one. So it's just easier not to include one. AWS can do it for us. And then here is where we're actually calling the API to create our new node. And in order to do this, we're not going to use this create node function, but we're going to use our mutations that we imported earlier. So we'll do mutations.create node. And then our input will be our note. And now this function list notes is something that we will do next. But for now, we're going to comment that out. And I'll tell you what that does when we bring it in, but we're not going to worry about that for right now. And then here, we're just setting the state back to be blank. So remember, when a user submits, whatever value that is currently in the state, value that's in the state variable value will then be submitted as a new note to AWS to the database. And we're going to save it and see what happens and see if everything compiled correctly. And it did. So now we're going to actually create a new note, and we bound everything. So it should be fine. We're going to call it here's a note. And again, you can see the value changing, and we're going to add new note. So we're going to actually add a try catch to see what is happening and to catch any errors and print them into the console. Oops, error. Okay, cool. And so let's go back and try to create a new node again. Add note, and then, no current user. Cool. So this is because we haven't actually set up authentication on our app yet. So that's quick and easy. So here we'll go back to the article once it loads. And all we have to do is just take this last line, if I can get it. And we want to export our app. Instead of having the default, we want to export our app with that authenticator that we were talking about earlier. And so if we do that, and if we save, we'll now see that in order to log in order to get into our app, you have to sign in. I'm not too sure why the styling isn't showing up, but we're just gonna go with it. And so we don't have an account, so we're gonna create a new account. Now I should be able to go back and sign in, which will let us into our app. So the styling is a little off. I don't know why it's doing that, but if you're playing around with it, you can kind of figure it out and see what's happening. And if you figure it out, please let me know down below in the comments, because I'm not sure why the styling for AWS is off. It's weird. Maybe I didn't install the correct package, but we'll see. But anyway, message, so that we know whether or not something was sent. What you have to do is add message to the list of things that you're taking from Ant Design. And we can say no uploaded, no added. I think I have to set the state after AWS is successful. So let's see. Here's a note. Added, no added. For some reason, it doesn't clear the value, and that's so weird. So now we want to be able to list all of the notes that we have in our database. Okay, so list notes. We're going to take this. We're going to take this function, and we're going to add it to our list. We're going to add it to our functions. And so instead of, it's very similar to the GraphQL call that we did for creating a new note, but instead we are going to use queries that we previously imported, and we're going to do list notes, which is one of the functions that's listed there. And then when we do that, we're going to get data within this variable called notes, and we're going to store that data into our state array. And when we get that data back in notes, it's actually a nested object. And so in that nested object, we have data, and then we have our list notes function that we called earlier, and then the actual note items. And then we can store all of that into our notes array. And so we actually want to call this function when our component mounts, so as soon as the page loads. And so we're going to take this mounting function, and now we're just going to call list notes here. And this should list all of the notes that we have and store them into our notes array. And now, if you actually want to take all that data and see what it looks like, what we can do is copy this function or this variable declaration, and then we're going to put that right before our return statement. And I can walk you through what this is doing. So this is going to create a variable called data, and it's going to just loop through all of the notes that we have in our state. And for each note, it's going to create a new alert object, but this is specific to Bootstrap, which is the framework that the author of the article is using. And we're just going to change this, and we're going to import card from Ant Design. And instead of having this be an alert, we're just going to have it be a card. We also have to change it here. And we're going to keep this, which will have the key of the item. And then on click, we want to select note, but we're going to take this out for a second. Actually, we can just implement select note, but I'll do that after the fact. And then here, we want to create our own button. And so we're going to just take the button that we have from the on click. And I think I can change the styling so that it's a little more distinguishable from the other button. And so, okay, we'll just call it type primary, which will give us the blue button that we see up top. And so on click, instead of the submit button, of course, this is different. So it's going to be for to delete it. This is actually going to be to delete the item. And we don't have this function implemented just yet, but we will. So we'll add that here, and we'll call this instead delete note. To load this data, we're just going to add it under, and so now we have to handle these two functions that we had originally put. And so select note is pretty easy. All it's going to do is select the current note that a user clicks on. And so it'll bind the item and take it as the variable note. And in this ID variable that we have in our state, it's going to store the note ID. And then the value that we have in our state is going to be stored as the note's note. So remember, in our schema, our note has this variable note, which is the actual string that we're storing. And then this display add, display update, I'll show you what that is later on, but that's basically what select note is. We're just selecting which note we want to handle. And then handle delete, all it's going to do is take the ID of the current note and then delete it from our database. And so we'll add this under select note. And so it takes an ID and then it creates this note ID object. And all it's going to do is delete our note. So we're going to take this delete function from mutations and delete note. And I think it takes input and then note ID, and then we'll also post notes. So this should be good, but also I think we need to bind the context of, oh, actually we don't need to bind the context of handle delete. So we'll save that and see what happens. It's loading, it's loading. So here are all of our notes, actually, which is pretty cool. So the styling is so off, I don't know what's happening, but here we can see that we have our notes that we created. So let's see what happens. Actually, I'll add a message. Remember, I need to add the try catch to so that I can be able to catch any errors that come up. And if there's a better way to handle this, please let me know, because this is actually how I currently do it on my app. And I'm sure there's a better way to do it, but for me, for looking at errors, this is kind of how I go about it. So we'll add a try catch to the handle delete so that we can see what happens if it doesn't work. And we'll also add a try catch to the list notes. And this is just so that if for any reason AWS doesn't work or it doesn't get our data, we can be able to see on the back end why that happened. And so that's list notes. And when we delete, I want to add a message to say that we deleted. So we'll just copy this success message and add it after the await, or after the function to delete the app is called. And so we'll just call this note deleted. And then it'll list all of our notes using this list function that we have here. So let's list the notes. And we also want to uncomment this so that we can list the notes after we finish adding the notes. This dot set state value equals this. Okay. So now we should actually be good to go. Again, no idea what's happening with styling, but hopefully I can fix that later on. So now, again, we can see all of our notes, and if I delete this, note gets deleted and then it gets updated on the back end. And then I can add a new note. Let's test it. And we see the notes added, and we see let's test it right there. And so obviously you can go in and style this as you want. This is just a foundational kind of guide to help you just set up the front end and the back end, and then you can go in and style this however you want, add more complexity as need be. And again, this is how I started out with Frostbite. If we actually click on a card, that didn't work. Card on click. So on click is supposed to set and display. So there's something wrong with our input, and I'm not sure what it is. Let's say value equals this dot, and I think that's actually what's happening, is that the value is not changing. Weird. Okay, hold on. Let me see what is happening. Okay, so I've been able to fix what was happening when our input for some reason didn't change. And that was just because I wasn't storing the actual value of the state in the value variable for the input. So that fixed it really quick. So you just assign the value for the input to be the current state value. And so anytime that value changes, we will be able to see it. Now, what I'm trying to figure out and debug is, and actually this is hurting my eyes, the layout right now. So let's add a grid, and we'll just pull in some columns. And I usually do this using another framework called Bulma because it's a little bit easier to use, but we're going to try it with Ant Design and see what happens. And so we want a row and a column, and I guess for each of these columns it's based on 24 spaces, and so you can divide that by 6 or 8 or 12. And so we're just going to take this, and we're going to have our first row be our YouTube, or our title. And then we're going to take the second row and we're going to make it our input. And then we're going to take out this span because we want the column here to be our button. So we have 2 columns in this one row. And then here we'll have one last row. And then we'll place the data there. But what we're going to do, what is this? That's wrong. We're going to take this and put the data here instead, and we'll put the divider right before it. And what we're going to do is wrap each one of these cars in a column. I think. Yes. We'll wrap each one of these cards in a column. We'll see what that looks like. Get some spacing and make it look decent on the eyes. Okay, they look not great, but it's better than what it was before. Actually, let's take this column and put it here. And then we'll take this column out. And this is all just styling, guys. Like, you really don't have to do this, but I'm a little bit of a stickler. This is so weird. Okay, why is it on the right-hand side? Let's do the span 24 and see what happens. Okay, that's better. And then what we're going to do is add the column, the row columns to the actual card so that we can be able to kind of get a better understanding of what the layout should look like. So we'll make one column with the actual note, and then we'll make another column with the button. And so, okay, why isn't there any, oh, you know what? We are going to span the column, which means make sure it takes up, we'll say half. We'll give this column also half, so it needs to add up to 24. And let's see if that does anything. Aha, better. Amazing. So now it looks a lot better visually to look at, I think. So we'll take out this console log. And now you can see what our notes look like. So again, we'll just walk through what's happening. So I'm able to add a note, another one, to our input, add that note, gets added, and then we're able to see it pop up down below. And then if I wanted to delete a note, I can delete it, can add another one, and delete another one. Awesome. So now what if I wanted to update a note? And that's the last thing that we're going to be doing. So now to update a note, I want to be able to select a note. Cool. So when I click this note, when you click on the note on the text, and maybe I should actually change that to being able to click on the card itself. So instead of clicking on you want to be able to click on the card. So actually, let's go back to inspecting the element. And so when we look at our state, what select note does, if we remember, is that it'll take the note and then store the ID of the note and the value into our state. Display add and display update will be used in the function when we go to update a note, and we'll get to that point. But I just want to reiterate that when we are selecting a note, we are storing the value and the ID of the note into our state. And so we should be able to see that when we click on a note. So let's say I wanted to click on creating a note. We can see that creating a note was put into the input because that's now the value of the note in the state. So we can see that our value is creating a note and that the ID is the ID of this item. If we were to click another one, the value is now set and the ID becomes the ID of this item. So now we want to actually update this note. All we have to do, well, we're going to take this function, the handle update function, and we're going to, you might have to tweak it a little bit, but we'll see. So again, similar to the submit function, and I'll actually put this near the submit function so that we can see what's happening. So like I said in the submit function, these 2 lines are just to handle multiple triggers and stop that from happening. And then again, we're creating another note, and we're actually not creating, we're creating a note object, but this time the ID is being supplied because again, we have that ID being stored in our state, and we don't want to create a new note, but we're updating a note that we already have. And so we have that ID being stored in the state, and so we're just going to assign that to ID, as that is one of the schema variables that we have in our object. And then the note is the value that we have in the state. So again, we clicked on another one and that value was set, and so we just want to hand that over to note. So now we're going to update that note and we're going to add a try catch, of course, so that if anything happens, we're able to see what the problem was. So we're going to, and again, we're going to change this to mutations and import our mutation function that was created for us, and then our input is going to be the note object that we created right above. And so then after we do that, we should just be able to list our notes, and then we are going to set the state. So I'm going to go over what display add does, but let me remember to add the catch so we don't run into any errors. And so now, so when we set the state, we want to set the value to be blank because we already updated it. So now we want to show the user that that was successful. So display add. So for this button here, we are going to make it conditional. So if I wanted to update a note, I'm going to use a function that we have called display update. And so this would be this.state.display update. And so what this does is when you put things in brackets in this return that is supposed to be returning the front end, when you put brackets in, this is now going to look at the logic and expect some type of logical expression. So we have a variable, right? We have display update as a variable. It's a Boolean. It can either be true or false. So for this variable, we want to check if it's true. And so all you have to do is just say this.state.update ? And all that's doing is saying, hey, is this.state.display update, is this variable true? If it is, do something. If not, then do something else. And that's what this kind of thing is. This logic is called a ternary operator, I think is what it's called, and it's used in many different languages, and this is just how it looks like in JavaScript. So you have, it's basically like a condensed version of an if-else statement. So if this, then this, else that. So if we have display update, which will be triggered when we select a note, we want to now display a button that will be able to update the note. So we're going to call handles update for this button. And we're going to make this a primary button. Or yes, a primary button, so that we can be able to tell the difference. So if we have display update, then we're going to show this button that'll handle the update. And then if we instead have display add, or actually we might be able to take out display add altogether, but we will see. So Now, whenever display update is set to true, we should get this update button. So let's see how that works. Let's just save that. Now go back to our app. Okay, so we're going to click on a note. And now, because display update was set to be true when we are clicking on a note, we can now update the note. So let's see if this actually works. Update note, another 1, 2. Update note should then hopefully work. Let's add a message. Did I do that so that I know whether or not it works? Update note updated. And then we'll just reload the page. Click on a note, update note 2, update note, add note, and we can see that it was actually updated. So yeah, so now you have a full-blown app, and obviously you can make this more complex, more flexible to what you want to do. But again, this was the foundation that I used to kind of start building out my app. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to answer any of the questions that you have. If you run into errors, please leave them down below, because I'm sure other people will also run into some errors. But yeah, let me know how you liked it. Let me know if you want more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.